Return to work. Is it really going to be business as usual, or are we missing something?
I think we could miss something if we consider it as business as usual. And I think there are two sides to this. There's the negatives, and then there's the opportunities or the positives. So speaking to a number of clients, ranging from sort of retail through to other sort of customer interactivity environments, they're pretty good at the physical side of things. Yeah. So they've got hand wash stations in, they've got Perspex screens if they have a B2C offering, all of that side of things. What a lot of them are failing to do is consider the mental aspects of their employees' return to work. So some of these people have been off now for weeks and weeks and weeks. They might have been furloughed, so not doing anything at all, or they could have been working from home. And as anybody who's worked from home knows, you have a very different work environment for a start. It can be quite a lonely environment. Your whole work routine can be very different because you haven't got an hour's commute to work, for example. So I think a lot of employees are potentially expecting people just to return to their normal routine, their normal work patterns. It
was before.
Exactly that. And that's just not the way to do it, because what you're then going to find actually is you have a sudden level of stress within your organisation. Because people don't like change generally. There are a few people that thrive in it, but as a general rule, as a race of people, we don't mind change if it's slow and gradual, but we don't like sudden shock changes to the system. So I think what a lot of employees haven't thought about yet is how they re-engage with their employees. And I think that re-engagement can take a number of forms.
Okay, so in a way, what you're saying is, in just the same way as it took people a little while to get used to being at home, to working from home or being furloughed, it's going to take them a little while to get back into the swing of working back in the office with everybody else around them.
Absolutely. And I think the question that the employer has to ask themselves is, do they want that? Actually, do they want that same return? So there is the psychological shock that needs to be dealt with. And I think a lot of businesses don't have mechanisms in place to cope with that, because they might not have had good engagement plans in the first place. So it depends on
So what do you mean by that kind of mechanism?
So is there a feedback mechanism in the business? Have they actually asked their employees about what their concerns are about returning to the work environment? Oh, wow. Have they spoken individually to them? Now, obviously, every industry is going to be different. And I think for some industries, it'll be a more natural return to work. If we think about the event industry or the retail industry or the hospitality industry, for example, it's pretty obvious how people are going to slot straight back into their role. Because the roles are quite clearly defined. I think the challenge comes with professional services firms, businesses that are sort of purely office-based, because all of a sudden, all these other environmental factors are back in play. So people might have actually found that they were more efficient when they were working from home. Yeah. They might have found, so even if they're in sales or whether they're in customer service and things like that. So if you look at a lot of the banks have enabled home working for their customer services people. So instead of calling a call centre, now you're actually calling someone, they're sitting in their front room. Being back in that large sort of bullpen environment could be very disruptive to that new work pattern. So this is what I mean by asking the employees what they want to do, because out of this can come a positive answer. If you engage with the people, ask them what worked well for them when they started working from home.
Yeah.
Because once they've identified that, they can then work out what wasn't working well in the office environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, give me an example, though, of something.
Distractions. Distractions is a classic. Yeah. So in a large office environment, people work 8 hours a day, or they're 9 to 5, whatever it is. Do they actually work that?
No.
No, of course they don't. So they come into the office and they'll make themselves a cup of tea and they'll have a water cooler chat, and then they'll do some work. And then they might have a cigarette break. They might have another coffee break. Then they'll have lunch, etc. They might have people coming up to them all day long, disturbing them at their desk. Oh, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So these little interactions, which are so obvious when you're all sitting in the same room, there's this void of those when you're working from home. you're
You
still...
have different distractions, of course.
You do have different distractions. It depends how well your home environment is set up, for sure, and how structured you are about it, how rigorous. Do you actually get out of your pyjamas, or are you still sitting in your pyjamas at 2:00 in the afternoon, for example? But people generally find, and there's been a fair number of studies around this, that actually people work harder when they're working from home,
Yep.
if they're able to. So because they have less distractions, colleagues will still reach out to them, but they might reach out via email or instant message.
It's asynchronous, so they can choose when to respond.
Exactly. So there's not this open door policy. And actually, I think you find that a lot of people in management find working from home much more productive than when they're actually sitting in the office.
I mean, I know, for example, that with some of the clients I've worked with, that whole business of switching off, not being interrupted, so you can get your head down and do that big job you've got to concentrate on to get done properly, is really difficult in a normal office environment.
Absolutely. And that's why a lot of offices create sort of breakout rooms and areas where people can work quietly and things like that. So that's for your staff that have been working throughout this, who are returning to the office environment. So they will have lessons learned from that, which might be valuable to improving the overall productivity of the business, that business fulfilling its promise of value. You've got a bigger problem with those that haven't been working.
Right. Yes, of course, they've effectively been on holiday.
Well, exactly. And I'm sure they filled their time up with lots of productive things, and I'm sure they've had really great quality family time. But all of a sudden, you're wrenching them back into a much more structured environment. And so there's the work element of that. They've got to get back into that work mentality. But there's also things like the fear factor.
Yeah.
Employers can't underestimate actually how fearful people are of the current environment situation. They're genuinely scared. And maybe they're not shielded for whatever reason, but maybe they think they should be shielded. And who's to say that they're right or someone else? The science in this is moving so quickly.
But also, you've got to get to work.
And that's it. And people are fearful about using public transport. People are fearful about sitting in office with lots of other people.
Yeah.
And how many employers are actually talking to their employees about this and asking them what their fears are and whether bringing them back into the workplace at this point of time is the right thing? Because what you will find is that people won't return. People would rather leave an organisation than be forced into a working environment where they're uncomfortable.
And of course, the way that works, generally, it doesn't matter what kind of shock your business is undergoing, whether it's, the current thing or something every business is experiencing, or whether it's just yours, like some sort of takeover bid. The people who go first are the people who are most able to go first, which are the ones you most want to keep.
Exactly. And the last thing you want is an employee's workforce that is forced to remain because they have no other option, because they won't engage with the brand. They've lost the trust in the brand. So I've spoken quite a lot before, and you and I have spoken about this before, that living the values of your employer brand, you have to live them from start to finish. And that includes in a crisis situation.
Absolutely, even more.
Yeah.
It's especially in a crisis situation, because that's when they really matter.
Yeah. How did you treat people? And there were organisations that get a lot of flack for how they treat their people. And if we think back to sort of the start of this crisis, airlines, a huge amount of flack for the way that they very quickly furloughed staff and things like that. But actually, how much of that is actually true? Because in one of my other roles, as you know, I do some frontline work with ambulances. In every hospital, or many hospitals that I've been to in the last couple of months, there have been first-class lounges set up by this thing called Project Wingman, which are cabin crew who've been furloughed are volunteering their time to set up these little coffee shops for NHS staff for free. And they're doing it in their uniform.
Nice.
So you've got someone with an EasyJet uniform, you've got someone with a British Airways uniform. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't believe in their brand. They are giving up their time. There's no reason for them to, apart from them doing their bit. And they're doing it absolutely smartly turned out, as you'd expect to see them on an aircraft. So actually, clearly, those employees felt that British Airways, EasyJet, etc., have lived by their values, and they are still willing to represent that organisation for even
more, really, they felt that doing that was part of the values of the brand.
Exactly. Exactly.
Brilliant.
So there's a classic example of where brand value matters, and they've bought into it. Because then coming back to, so there's some of the negatives, and this engagement with people, and this is what those organisations have done well. They've engaged with their people. They've engaged early. They've explained the situation. They've brought them into the problem, and they've shared the problem. And as a result, their workforce has been loyal and engaged. So if you can get it right. Now, the flip side of this, and the other things that people need to think about, employees really need to think about, is this is a unique opportunity to reshape their business. And if I look at this from pure employee process aspect of it, dragging your employees an hour each way to do a job that they can do from the end of a telephone, from the end of a computer, why? Why? Just why? And this reminds me again, I keep harping back to British Airways for some reason, but do you remember when Waterside was built, the British Airways headquarters building at Heathrow, back in the, whatever it was, 80s? There was this great hoo-ha about the fact that this was the first headquarters building that didn't have enough desks for everybody.
Right. Oh, they were hot desking.
Yeah, they were hot desking, shared desks, because people weren't there all the time. So leap that forward to now. How many organisations have actually looked at their current model, and I don't care whether you're a 5-man business or a 500-man person business, I should say. Do you need that space? Do you need those people to physically turn up? Can you create a better working environment for your employees out of this crisis than they had before? Can you reduce your costs and therefore improve your profitability?
And can you reduce their costs?
Exactly that. Can you make their day... So think about someone's a typical... When I used to commute to London, which I did for 20 years, so I've got my train ticket, which in today's money is probably 25, 30 quid return. I had a coffee on the way to work. I probably had a coffee out sometime during the working day, and I had my lunch. Yeah. So my cost of being in London for that day was somewhere in the region of 35 to 40 pounds.
And actually it's more than that, because you've got to live within commuting distance,
yep.
Which means you've got to be able to spend, X amount on a house, and if you can't afford that, you've got to live further out and spend more on your transport in.
That's it.
So yeah.
So there's a huge cost. So you're saving that for them. It's all around creating a better employer brand, which obviously I harp on about constantly. If you can be a more flexible employer, and this crisis has shown just how flexible employers can be, then you can create this much better working environment for people. And it's not without its failings. There's something about being physically in the same location as other people when it comes to Teams and so on, that you can't replicate, even with the best video conferencing in the world. But what I'm suggesting is maybe people can take a more blended approach.
Okay. And actually, it's not like this hasn't been done before.
No.
I don't know if you've heard of a company, they were called F International.
No.
An IT company set up by a woman in the 60s, right back in the 60s. And her target for employees were women who were at home with families, who had been really good IT people, but were now at home because they needed to look after a family. So she set up a whole structure that allowed them to work at home, but also allowed them to get together when they needed to for project meetings, team meetings. They used village halls, they used church halls, they used all sorts of things to make that happen. And this is all before internet, mobile phones, all the rest of it.
With the tools available today, I mean, it's so easy to keep a team together. And there's two sides to this. There's the productivity side. So as I said earlier, when you go to an office, do you really work for that whole 9 to 5? No, you don't. So actually, if you're working from home, can you actually condense the working day down to 5 hours?
Yeah.
I think without question. I mean, I remember when I started working from home as opposed to commuting to London every day, I suddenly realised that what I did in London for a whole week, I could get into 2 days.
Yeah, absolutely.
What opened up all this additional time, which is why I now spend a third of my time volunteering, because I can. Yeah. But I'm still being as productive, if not more productive. So there's that bit to it. There are tools now, things like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, whatever. You can have those on all the time.
Yeah.
Your team can be there on their screen all the time. You can engage like that. But even if you took a blended approach and you said, right, instead of coming in 5 days a week, you only come into the office 2 days a week.
Yeah.
3 apparently is the economic cut-off point, if that makes sense, between having a season ticket, not having a season ticket.
Okay.
The cost argument. Yeah. So if you're there for more than 3 days or more, then you might as well be there for the week. But if you're less than 3 days physically there, and let's face it, who can't get done in 2 days of physical togetherness what needs to be done?
Yeah, it just needs
Unless-
to be more organised.
That's it. Unless you're a manufacturing environment where you need people sitting on the production line, of course. But we're talking about an office-based environment here.
Yeah.
And 2 days of physical time should be enough. And you can blend it, you can mix it around. It doesn't need to be every Monday and every Friday, or it doesn't need to be every day of the week. It can fit to suit people. And this is where this engagement with people, again, comes from. I would say to employers now, interview your staff coming back to their jobs, particularly your key staff. Interview them as if you're interviewing them for their job again. Because they've now got the knowledge of what the task is. They've worked in your business. They understand the business. They know what worked for them in an office environment. They know what worked for them in a home environment, and equally what didn't work for them. And ask them to rewrite their job description from a practical standpoint.
Yeah.
So that's one bit of it. Secondly, don't force staff to do something they're not 100% comfortable with, because in the long run you will lose that member of staff. And once you've done that once, you have completely devalued any employer brand that you have.
Yeah. I would also add another thing, which is worth thinking about outside work hours as well. So I'll give you an example, because again, this in a way is a bit of a foretaste of what we're going through now. I used to work in a software house, and we had an office right in the middle of London in Leicester Square. And some of us would be out on client sites because that's what we did, and some of us would be in the office. And one of the things that company did, which I thought was really good, was that every month they had a meeting of the directors and the staff, and anybody who was within travelling distance of the office would come in and have that meeting, and they would share all the figures, all the information about how well we were doing or not, and what was going on, etc. with us. And then everybody went out for dinner. And they did that because it was a great way to keep in touch with the people who were otherwise remote because they were working on client sites and might have felt disconnected from the business.
And there's outliers, and that is the danger for organisations that have been forced to work from home, that haven't done it before. They haven't got the processes in place to protect people. And there's 2 levels of protection. There's protection for the business in terms of, are they doing enough work? But actually the reality is, this is a bit well, that's it. It's a bit like when supermarkets started up auto tills. They thought everybody was going to, and they're scanning shopping as you go around. They thought people were just going to walk out with trolley loads of stuff. The reality is they found that actually people overscanned, didn't underscanned as a general rule. So there's that side of it. So people generally work from home. It's pretty obvious when they're not. The second piece of that, in terms of how do you maintain their mental connection, and that's the challenge. If you haven't put those processes in place, if you don't, as you say, that software house, they had a reasonably regular routine. I think companies can go too extreme on this. So they go, oh right, we're all working from home now. It's great. We'll get rid of our headquarters building. Don't need it anymore. It's fine. No, actually, you do. You still need, for people that want to. And this again comes back to,
Even if that's a transition as well, it may be that people transition.
and maybe long term it can, but people still need to feel there's a hub somewhere that they can be part of, should they choose to be part of it. So it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It is capitalising on the lessons learned over the last couple of months, looking at your business processes and what can work very effectively, and then taking the best of that. But let it be driven by your employees, because they are your business at the end of the day. You can have the best widget in the world, but unless your employees are out there taking it to customers and making it work for customers, no one's going to know about it. Yeah. Betamax was much better than VHS.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, kind of to sum up, I mean, I would say, this whole situation's been, everybody's had to kind of scramble a bit to deal with it. And on the whole, people have coped much better than they might have expected at the beginning. But just because it's working doesn't mean it's working as well as it could be. Now's the time to think, okay, we managed. How do we make this really productive?
Yeah, you will never, as a business owner, I don't think, ever have an opportunity like this to re-engineer your business in such a safe and protected way, because there are backstops. The government's financially made it as easy as possibly they can for a business to stop and have a look at itself. If you don't do it, if you don't look at it and take this opportunity, then you are missing a huge open goal.